Welcome to the Keeper of the Home podcast. I'm Cami, creator of the blog and channel TIDBITS Company, and your host here on this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, last week, I read you guys a story called When Queens Ride By. And this story has been one of the most impactful stories of my life, and I really wanted to share it with you. So I hope if you haven't heard the story, you'll go back to last week's episode and listen. But today, I really want to dive in and share some of my thoughts and insights on why this story has made such an impact in my life. The first time I heard this story, I was extremely angry and filled with a bit of bitterness and really rejected its message. But my heart was softened, and it has actually become my favorite story of all time and so life-changing in how I look at my role as a homemaker. But before I really dive in, I do have a few housekeeping items, if you will. So it is September, and I don't know if you know this or not, but September is Emergency Preparedness Month. And so in support of that really great theme and cause, I wanted to let you know that over in my TIDBITS Company shop site, I actually have an emergency evacuation preparedness class. This is something Mr. TIDBITS and I created for you guys, and our goal was to help as many people as possible to get prepared for any type of emergency evacuation situation. So we've got a printable pack full of just checklists and things that can help you figure out what exactly you need to include in packs, what kind of packs to make so that you're prepared for emergency evacuations, as well as several videos to help guide you through how to compile and what to include in emergency evacuation kits, like a 72-hour kit, car kits, kits for your pets. And we are really passionate about emergency preparedness and really want to help you get prepared. So I hope you will check that out over at tidbitsandcompany.com and then click over to my shop page and check out the classes that I have for you there. I also wanted to let you know that on my blog at tidbitsandcompany.com, we have just wrapped up like a whole lavender series. Lavender is a bit of an obsession of mine, if you haven't been able to tell yet. And so we have compiled several blog posts just helping you dive into different ways that you can use lavender for culinary or for your home or for like bath and body products. Lots of really fun ideas on lavender happened last month on the blog, so I hope you'll check that out. And on the YouTube channel recently, I did a video sharing all my favorite kitchen appliances and the ones that I couldn't live without. So I thought that was a really fun video to just talk about appliances and the ones that I have and love. So if that interests you, head over to my TIDBITS Company YouTube channel. And finally, in the housekeeping, if you could just take some time, maybe pause this episode, or when you're done listening, if you have a minute or two to leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform, a 5-star, subscribe, leave me a comment on my YouTube channel, anything to just help me in this new pursuit of mine to get this podcast out to more homemakers, to inspire and encourage. I would really appreciate any efforts you could give me, even if you're just out with some friends and you can share this podcast that you like to listen to. I would be so very grateful for your help in my efforts. Okay, let's talk about this story, When Queens Ride By. Now, just as a caveat, I can't remember the exact timing of this story, but you might want to be aware. The original author is Agnes Sligh Turnbull, and I believe this book was published early 1900s. I couldn't find the exact date, but it is an older classic, and sometimes those older literature pieces have differing views from our modern ways. So it's always good to look back and kind of expand your mind that way. But I would love to hear what you thought of this story if you gave it a listen. And really, if you haven't, I would probably stop this episode and then head over and listen to the full story so it'll make more sense as I talk through it. But I would love to hear what you think. Did anything kind of, I don't know, was anything in the story a tough pill for you to swallow? Did it bring up any difficult thoughts like it did for me the first time I listened to it? I would really love to hear. Or maybe you're a little confused and you really can't understand why this was a difficult story for me in the first place. Maybe you just accepted it and loved it, and you're kind of wondering, what's your problem, Cami? Why was this so difficult? And I just have to say, I suppose this story was difficult for me to swallow at first, is a little bit because I guess I could refer to myself as a recovering feminist. I don't know. I was never like full-on feminist movement. I've always loved and valued my place in the home and am grateful for it. But I did have those years, especially when my kids were really little and I didn't do much else but the housework and the kids. I did have those years where I felt a little undervalued, I guess, underappreciated. I felt like my talents were stifled and that my days were just full of mundane work. And then my priorities kind of shifted to, business or my hobbies, and my focus was kind of pulled away from my kids and my home. So I'm trying to kind of recover from a lot of those feelings that I held for about a decade. So this story really just kind of bubbled up some emotions, and then I had to work through them. And then it became one of the most beautiful stories I have ever heard for me. I also found that I related so much to Jenny, the main character in this story. I could relate to her feelings of feeling a bit stuck in progress, feeling like you're just working and working and working and working too hard to just not get anywhere, feeling like maybe you're doing too much of man's work and just feeling exhausted all the time and neglecting my home. And anyway, the place that this Jenny was in really kind of triggered some feelings for me because they were very relatable. But with her feelings being so relatable, I also, the first time I heard this, was a little angry that the solution that this story kind of implied seemed really unrealistic to me. And it made me a little angry. I thought, wouldn't that be nice? Just clean yourself up, cook a nice meal, and all your problems will be solved. That is how I saw it the first time I listened to it, and have since dove deeper for sure and gleaned so much from this story. But I think those are the reasons why it was difficult for me to hear at first. So the first time I heard this story, I actually listened to it on the Well-Educated Heart podcast. Well-Educated Heart is like an app and a resource. It's amazing. And I actually walk you through the Well-Educated Heart website in my homeschool exploration class. So I really dive deep into that if that's something you'd be interested into looking into. But that is where I ran into it for the first time. And I had no idea what it was going to be about. I just, plopped it up and went about my work listening to it and was just kind of taken back by the message. And I kind of just shoved it aside for a while, but then I was reading this book that I also got from the Well-Educated Heart. You can get this whole book for free online, by the way, if you have like a tablet and you want to read it. But this is called A Mother's Influence. And I was reading this book, loving it, and then I turned the page and realized that she had included the written version of When Queens Ride By. And at first I was going to skip it, but this book had done a really good job at softening my heart already. So I decided to read the story. And that's when it all changed. Just the opportunity to kind of slow down, already have an idea of what the story is about. I feel like I came at it at a different direction. I knew the ending this time, and I took it slower so that my heart would be a little more open, and I knew my feelings were going to be a little vulnerable. And so I felt a little humbled as I went in the second time. And I got to tell you, God worked his miracles on my heart and changed my perception completely about how I look at homemaking and keeping my home. Just completely changed how I feel about this amazing work I get to do. And I just want to say, I don't intend to share any of this to hurt anyone. If you feel differently, if you have different opinions, that's totally okay. I know that there are seasons of our lives that are going to make us feel differently about homemaking, or things like this will impact us differently. But if you're here with me in this season of my life. And so I'm just sharing about this stuff in the here and now. So I hope you'll just meet me here where I am at. Okay, let's chat about this story. Let's go back to the beginning of this story. The way it opens up is very interesting to me. It paints this picture of Jenny, who is this overwhelmed woman. You clearly get a glimpse of that at the beginning. And she has quite the negative outlook on her life and things around her. Immediately she comments about looking out the window and the day is going to be hot. It fills her with dread. She talks about her workload that is just totally unmanageable, but she just has to do it anyway. And you really get this idea that she is a victim of her circumstances. And then she reminisces on times where her and her husband had such high hopes and promising dreams. And this story, I feel, so relates to Kevin and I. We are such dreamers, like to the core, and it is such a blessing and such a curse, because a lot of times our dreams are a little unrealistic or they're going to require more time and money than we will ever have. And then we hope for these things, we dream for these things, and then it just feels like we're constantly crushed by reality, by money, by time, by the amount of work these things will take. And then we at times feel motivated to work harder, but then we get stuck feeling like we're never getting ahead. So when I read this story and read about Jenny and her life, I just instantly could feel her pain. And this part of the story, it really just gets me every time. It just brings me to tears because I can just really feel her pain. And I'm going to be kind of vulnerable here, you guys. So be nice to me. But we have had these times of dreams, and we've found the determination and kind of worked hard and scrimped and saved and have felt like we were just on a hamster wheel and not getting anywhere. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but there have been times in your life where that is very real. It just doesn't seem to matter how hard you work. It feels like someone is just holding you back and not letting you succeed. And it doesn't make sense, because the way the world should work is the more effort you put into something, the more you should get out of it. But sometimes we just feel so extremely stuck. And I would say this really started to hit home for Kevin and I when we started building this home. We really had to do it on a budget because most of our money went into the land. And so Kevin did almost the whole thing by himself. I was living in a trailer, an RV that we fixed up with our 4 kids. And I would say from that time on, just trying to finish this house without going into more debt, scrimping by, it has just felt really hard and has felt like a season of lack instead of a season of abundance. And that's when I also started homeschooling, which is what an overwhelmed mother needs to do. But it was a very, very strong prompting I couldn't deny. And my husband had his 9-to-5 job that he just was so unhappy at. It was a desk job, and he is not made to sit at a desk all day. I determined to work really, really hard on my business so that I could try to provide for us more and also get the projects done around this house. So I felt quite a bit of pressure to succeed at my work. And that put a whole layer of weight on me personally. And then it has been, and if I'm being quite honest, still feels this way at times. It doesn't matter how hard I work, I just cannot get ahead. So anyway, I'm sure you have your perceptions of my life on here, but that's just really the reality of how much of our life has been. And so to read this story about Jenny and her husband maybe you'll see why it just resonated so much with me. Okay, so in this part of the story, Jenny also talks about doing man's work, and she actually felt, I guess, some pride in herself for being able to step it up and do the man's work with her husband. Now, if you get offended by gender roles here, I am truly sorry, because that's what basically this story is about and what we're going to talk about today. So if you really do not like to talk about gender roles, this may not be your podcast. But we actually like to joke about gender roles. And in fact, if you guys ever see my husband or have the opportunity to talk to him, just make sure you remind him that it is, in fact, man's work to take out the garbage. There's no such thing as woman's work, but there is a few things in the home that are just man's work. Taking out the garbage, changing the light bulb, it just is. Anyway, I'd like to just, lighten this up and add some humor to this story. But Jenny felt like she was in a position where she had to do the man's work. She had to do heavy lifting. She had to do hard harvesting, and hardly ever had time for the things in the home or for her children. Jenny also talks about the highway by her house. And this highway, she often sees, the fancy cars just driving by, and she assumes that those who get to just drive by have such an easy life. And how nice would it be just to be able to go for rides in a luxurious car and enjoy life's recreation. And you can clearly see that she is assuming she knows what their life is like just by seeing this little glimpse into the people that drive by on the highway. And I thought a lot about this, and then don't we just absolutely do this all the time in our life, whether we run into someone in real life or follow them in social media, that's our busy highway. And it is so easy to assume that their life is going so well and ours is so difficult and they can never relate. It is really easy to get stuck in that mindset. And I had a certain period of my life, and it was when we were kind of building the home and just so crazy, busy, and burdened that I actually had a really hard time getting on social media and following anyone that would travel or share really fun things that they would do with their family, because we just didn't take the time, prioritize it, however you want to say it. That was not a part of our life at that time. Hard work was, and scrimping and saving was. And it was very difficult for me to follow people's feeds or hear about people's travels. It just filled me with this ache and a jealousy that I really did not like to live with. And what I noticed about that time and when I felt that way is I was feeling that way because there was a major hole or void in my life that I actually desperately needed to fill. Recreation is an important part of life, and if we don't allow for that and just work hard all the time, we are going to feel empty. Now, sometimes you can do something about those feelings and change your situation. Other times we maybe won't be able to. But I had to just step back and realize that's why I couldn't follow friends or family or other people that would have a lot of fun or perceive that they were having a lot of fun, right? Because there was a serious unmet need in my life. So if you ever have any kind of feeling or jealousy, or you make assumptions about other people and feel like your life is less than, really try to think about your own life and find out if there is something that you need to actually put into your life, and that there might be a hole there that you need to fill so that you feel more complete, so that when you see people's lives going well, you see people having fun, being happy, or whatever it is, you can actually take joy in that with them and be happy for them. So just something to kind of think about there. But as Jenny talked about the people on the highway, I found this also very relatable. And as Jenny is talking about, the drudgery of her life, this part in the book really stung my heart. And she says, "Of all the drudgery, this hurt the most, that she had not time to care for her children, sew for them, teach them things that other children knew. And that paragraph goes on, like the hardest part in the life that Jenny and her husband found themselves in is that she could not fully fulfill her motherhood duties, and that she felt like she was showing up less than she wanted to for her children. And I can relate to that as well. In the busy seasons of our lives, I felt like the kids are just in the way, or that they get like what's left of us at the end of the day. And that really hurts a mother's heart, because I don't think that's how it's supposed to be. I feel like mothers just will always truly yearn to be there for their kids and to be the best mother that they can possibly be. And when there's something kind of in the roadblock of that expression of our identity, it can really, really hurt. I went to college and there was the sign in the building. So I had got a degree in family and consumer science education, so very family oriented. But there was this sign that I looked at every single day because it was right at the entrance down the stairs. And it was a quote by David O. McKay, and he said, "No success in life can compensate for failure in the home." And that has always stuck with me. And so if there's ever been seasons of my life where I feel like I'm failing at home, even though something else in my life might be going well, there's just an emptiness. So I can relate to Jenny and that hole that she had in her heart and the desire that she had to just show up a little better for her kids and for her husband. And then speaking of her husband, she spoke briefly of their marriage relationship, how if they were talking, it was just, to talk about the work, to talk about what needed to be done. There was limited conversation, and there was just no space in their lives to enjoy their best friend. And that is sad. That is very, very sad. Okay, that brings us to the part of the story where the woman from the highway shows up, and we don't ever know her name. She is just the stranger in this book, or the woman from the highway. And I love the moment when these two women meet. So there's one that is glamorous, clean and beautiful. And then there's the mother that is run down, hardly had time to look at herself in the mirror that morning, just threw on the work clothes of the day. And these two women meet. And I love how the book portrays this introduction as they're both almost speechless and feeling like the other woman is like so foreign to them. And there's really no words, but they both find themselves in this moment of judgment. And for good or bad, I think no matter what, when we see people, we kind of instantly put on some sort of judgment. It doesn't have to be righteous or unrighteous. It's just, I guess, observations. And if we are too judgmental, those can be negative thoughts. But I think it is also very natural. So you see this situation with Jenny and this stranger and this very natural moment of judgment of each other. And as I've been thinking about this, I just really hope that as sisters, as fellow keepers, we will look at each other with kindness and try to judge each other with kindness and acceptance and understanding that we do not know each other's full story. We don't know the situations that cause someone to present themselves in any sort of way. So I hope, ladies, we can just be very kind and considerate when we meet and get to know each other. And I think it's so interesting, and you can clearly see in this situation that judgment of one another can happen both ways. It can happen from someone above looking below, or someone below looking above. We make those judgments no matter our situation or standing in life, that it just naturally happens. But I did find it interesting that the woman who was stretched far too thin in her life and exhausted and beat down and burdened, she had the harsher judgments. And the book called them unconscious hostility towards this stranger. And that is just very interesting to me, that she was so beat down and burdened that that was the type of judgment that she immediately had for someone else. And we see that the woman who had learned to make space in her life, she had room in her soul to see this woman differently and to see her situation and wish that she could help and serve her. So very interesting contrast there in this meeting. That gives us just so much food for thought. So next up in the book, Jenny leads the woman from the highway back through the house to get to the apple tree where the woman wanted to buy some apples. And Jenny, as she's leading this fancy, beautiful woman through her house, this is when she starts to notice what a disaster her home is. And she notices all the clutter laying around. She notices that the food was still left out. And isn't it so funny that these things don't really pick at us unless we feel like someone's coming over or someone might judge us. And then all of a sudden we see the little faults in our homes and in ourselves, and then start to get those feelings of discontent about our home, which I've also talked about here on this podcast. And I have to just say, I do that too. Like if someone comes by, I just instantly have this inclination of like, oh my goodness, like the house is a mess, or I wasn't prepared for this. But I have to say, if I ever go into someone else's home that is, less than perfect or far from perfect, it doesn't matter. I honestly don't even notice those things. And yet I'm so worried about them in my own home. And I really think we could just give each other grace here, realize that our homes are for living. They're never going to be perfect, or we're never going to be perfect. And I don't think people are seeing our flaws and insecurities as much as we really think they are. I think most of the time we're just really afraid of being judged. But you really have to think about this natural inclination that we might have. Like, who are we keeping our homes for? Is it for ourselves, for our families? Or is it for the perception of a visitor or for social media? Why are we keeping our homes, and what are the things that are really worth worrying about? And as I read that part of the story, it really got me thinking about that. Anyway, lots of good stuff. And if you're watching this on video, I hope you don't mind. It's getting a little dark and moody in here. It is evening, and this is about the only time I had to film this podcast. We started homeschool today and things got busy, so I'm doing this in the evening, but hopefully it doesn't get too dark in here and you can still see me all right. All right, so the next part of the story is kind of this like tipping point for Jenny, and I love it. And so she's feeling paranoid about her house, and she starts to move this really large, heavy ladder, and this stranger says, "You can't lift that heavy ladder. That's man's work." And Jenny just loses it, and she lets the stranger have it, and she just dumps out her burdens on this woman. I think without meaning to, just at this point of like feeling overwhelmed and judged and burdened. And this woman makes this comment and she loses it. And rather than being offended or walking away or, saying something mean, this woman from the highway was so kind and just encourages Jenny to sit a while and tell her more. She invites her to just talk. And she had to do some convincing and to help Jenny justify the time that she could afford it if she just didn't bother getting her apples, that she would just take some on the floor. And I love this reaction from this kind stranger. And it got me thinking that there really is no greater kindness in the world than to just listen to someone when they're struggling. I know we can do a lot of things. We can make a meal. We can pray for them. We can take their kids, do some service. But honestly, just allowing another person to talk and to share their burdens with you, I think is the ultimate act of love. And it's not easy to do. So I love how this stranger demonstrated that we can do this just by a simple invitation to just sit a minute and talk with me. And I want to ask you, has anyone ever done that for you? Have you ever done it for someone else and seen what happens as a result? I know my sister and I, we have very similar personalities, and when one of us is struggling, we don't really need each other to like bring these meals. Of course, any act of service is just kind and welcome and thoughtful, but it is those times where my sister has just let me talk to her or asked me the questions to get me to start talking, whether it's in person or Marco Polo, any way that if she knows I'm struggling, if she just invites me to talk, that's what means the world to me and helps me more than just about anything. So I encourage you to do the same next time you meet someone who may be struggling. Just invite them to talk with you for a minute. So as Jenny is telling this stranger her burdens and dumping it all out for her, the stranger asks her, "And you think this has helped your husband?" And I love Jenny's reaction. In fact, I'm going to open it up here and read it because it's just so good. She says, "Helped him," and Jenny's voice was sharp. "Why shouldn't it help him?" And then I love what the stranger said. She said, "Men are such queer things, husbands especially. Sometimes we blunder when we are trying hardest to serve them. For instance, they want us to be economical, and yet they want us in pretty clothes. They need our work, and yet they want us to keep our youth and beauty. And sometimes they don't know themselves which they really want most. So we have to choose." And I have thought about that a lot, that men don't actually know what they really want, so we have to choose. That's an interesting thought, is it not? But I love at this point the stranger proceeds to tell Jenny about how she learned this lesson, that her husband actually wanted her to get involved with the business. And she had to make the choice to tell him, "No, I will not do that." And instead, she let him figure it out. And the book says, "At last he won, and he won his success alone, as a man so loves to do." And I think a great deal about this, actually. And I don't know if any of my conclusions are accurate. It's just so much food for thought. This, what is the nature of the man and a woman? And I often think about the animal kingdom. The roles of the male and the female are so strong, and they're consistent among all the animals and families of animals, and their instincts that just are there. And I think, are humans the same? Are we supposed to be the same? Are men supposed to have that domineering, providing, protecting nature, and women have the more nurturing and caring and nesting nature, if you will? Are these actually supposed to be the natural way of life if we're not living in a toxic environment? Anyway, it's just a lot of things to think about. But I don't know the answers to all those, but I do think about how we as women and homemakers can support our husbands best to benefit the whole family or the whole society. What can we actually turn our focus and attention on that would actually serve our family best? And really, you got to ask yourselves, how vital is my role as keeper of the home to the success of the whole? I often ask myself, does turning most of my attention to homemaking actually strengthen everyone else? How vital is my role? And that stranger's comment of, "as a man so loves to do," I do kind of feel like a righteous, noble man does love and desire to provide those in his keeping. And so how can what I do provide him space to do that even better? It's definitely a lot to think about. Okay, YouTube friends, I had to flip on my light above and it's a green shade, so now I look green, but don't worry, I'm not sick. But we just gotta wrap this up tonight. All right, so thinking about that, I often wonder, if I wear myself out, if I try to do too much, am I actually hindering my husband's progress as a provider and a protector? And you may or may not know our situation, but my job as an online content creator has brought my husband home. And this is a season of sacrifice. We're not super comfortable financially, but he was so miserable at his desk job and wanted to do so much more with his hands. And so we're in this season of sacrifice where I need to kind of step it up in order to give him the opportunity to come home and work on the businesses that he has really wanted to do, namely the lavender, and then lately he's building saunas. Anyway, there's a lot of things that he would rather be doing, farming, homesteading with his hands to help provide for our family, versus going to a 9-to-5 desk job that really fulfills him. And he often tells me that he really has never worked harder and that his boss here at home is the strictest boss he's ever had. Anyway, I pride myself in that, but we are working hard in this season of sacrifice. But that means I'm also living in a place where I've never really been as the main provider of the family currently. And there is kind of this level of pressure there, doing what I would deem a man's work and providing for a home. But he does so much to ease my burdens. In other places, it's working out great. But whenever I read this story, I think, what if I don't want to forever make the money? In fact, I don't. But I want to rather show him how smoothly things can go when I step into the role that I'm really best at, and that is keeping my home, being there for the children, cooking the nourishing meals, and try to understand as a family how much better that will be if I turn more of my attention there and do what I'm really good at, and then let him do the work with his hands that he is really good at. So that's our current situation, and I'm sure yours is a bit different, but it makes me think, like, why are we living in a world where we feel like we have to have two incomes? Is there really any good with having both parents being stretched thin and kind of wore to the bone and being exhausted for the family? Is there really any good that can come from that? That sacrifice to just have more luxury and more money. And we really have to wonder if we chose to set aside as homemakers the need to increase our financial situation and let him do that. I wonder if things would go a little bit smoother. And again, I have a lot of unpopular opinions, but this is what this story made me think of, right or wrong. And it may be different, of course, for all of our situations, but it is definitely something I've thought about. And my husband and I have talked about I used to just want to just really, really succeed at this job, really go big. But my desires have greatly changed. I just want to do it in this season of sacrifice that we're in and allow my husband to take the reins from there and to find a way to do that. I really do feel like we'll find more satisfaction and fulfillment that way. So it's just been a lot of food for thought as I've pondered that and our roles and our nature and maybe how things are just intended to be. Okay, moving on with the story. And I love that this woman from the highway tells us this story of queens. And that is where the title of the story gets its name, When Queens Ride By. It's basically a story within a story. So the woman from the highway tells her about this queen who was in charge of a people. And when things would go really bad, that's when the queen would dress up, get in her finest, and parade around town and be optimistic and celebrate with the people. And that act from the queen is what actually lifted the people up and encouraged them and inspired them and moved them to help their situations. And I think it's just so magnificent to think about the power that one person can have, one optimistic person who has a tender love and care for the people and can show up in a way that they need them to when they're discouraged or worried. And the woman on the highway says this to Jenny. She says, that's the woman's part, to play the queen. And that statement, that women are meant to play the queen, is not meant to make anyone angry. And I don't think it's meant to say that women are supposed to be an ornament. and only that. Goodness no, I do not think that is the message of the story. But I think it's helping us understand what we actually hold in our hands, for better or worse, as keepers of our homes. I know you've all heard the phrase, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And I think this is such a beautiful God-given gift that we have and that we can use for good. Sometimes it feels like a burden, when we're just really down and cannot seem to put on our finest and strut around the house with optimism. We do all have those moments of humanness, of course, but it's fascinating to experiment, if you will, with that influence and power that we actually have as keepers of the home to encourage and uplift and govern the mood of everyone else. It can be as simple as putting down a nourishing meal after everyone's had a long, hard day, or just a happy embrace, a clean environment. What power we have to affect people's emotions and influence how they go about their day. It's really amazing to think about and such a gift. Okay, so the woman from the highway leaves Jenny's house, and Jenny has this reaction as the woman leaves. She describes it as a great wave of longing and a desire lost in choking despair. And I think that's why this story was hard for me to hear the first time, because that's where I was at the time. Kind of this deep desire to just be a homemaker, but feeling choking despair that we are in this position now where I can't just be that. And it left me feeling a little bitter. Because yes, that would be so nice, and I see my power and I see my influence, but I'm stuck. I'm stuck as a victim of my circumstances. How wonderful it would be to just sit around and eat bonbons and play with my kids and always have a clean house. Wouldn't that just be so nice? But of course, reality sometimes smacks you in the face. But thankfully, the story doesn't end there. And I hope your feelings don't either. I hope you carry through, read the story, and leave a little more encouraged than I did the first time I read this story. Because next, we have a moment of action and a moment of truth and triumph coming. So this moment of action, Jenny's desire overcomes her despair, and it's a wonderful moment in this story. And what causes it is this little token of remembrance that the woman from the highway accidentally dropped. It's a handkerchief that she owned, full of her fragrance and delicate beauty in this little handkerchief, and it inspires Jenny to action. And she dropped the chore to-do list, and with a burning zeal, she cleans herself up, she tidies the home, she cleans up the children, and she makes a warm, nourishing meal. And then the moment of truth and triumph. So Henry Davis comes to call, and this is a man who has the power over Jenny and her husband's life to foreclose the farm and leave them with nothing. And that's what she believes he's come to do. And instead of being discouraged and angry at this man, she puts out all the charm. She pretends all is well, that the farm's going great, that they're excited to pay him off. And her husband walks in and she completely renders him speechless with her environment, her presentation, her attitude, her encouragement. Her husband is just absolutely speechless. And this moment where Jenny is perhaps acting a little, changes the course of their lives. And Henry walks away full, happy, generous, and full of hope that the farm will make it. And he leaves, and they have a lot of hope ahead of them now, instead of feeling like they'd lost everything. And because of this moment, Jenny's husband finds himself pulling out a sketchbook and feeling encouraged, and he figures out another way to make things work. He looks at his workload a different way, and finds out a solution to their problems. So she triumphs because of this desire that she had to hone all her magical powers as the keeper of her home and turn things around. It's a beautiful moment, but I also love the ending of the book where the woman from the highway is off and gone and speaking to her husband in their car, and she is unsure that anything she said or any deed that she could have done for this lady that was so burdened, that anything she did really helped her at all. And she wished she could have done more. And she really has no idea how her decision to lean into the important role as keeper of the home has changed the world for good. And so, my fellow keeper, we don't always do things perfectly. Our burdens may be currently holding us back from our ideals, but I challenge you to experiment with the principles taught in this story. Get really curious about the powers that you hold when you lean into and love your role as the keeper of the home. I really hope you've gained something from this story. Please let me know your thoughts. As I have pondered my purpose here on this podcast, I truly want to leave you encouraged and uplifted. And I felt like this story, When Queens Ride By, would really help do that. So I will leave you a link below where you can find this story and print it out if you'd like to. If you'd like to take a minute to read it yourself, it's completely free on the Well-Educated Heart website. I will link you to it. But I wish you all my best as you strive to find and maybe refine your purpose in your home. All right, I will be back. Thank you so much for listening, and tune in again as I show up here to share more inspiration for the keeper of the home.